Hello, my name is Nicholas Morgan, and I'm an editor at Ahval News, and this is Turkey Abroad. Joining me today is Dr. Zenonas Tziarras at the Prio Center in Nicosia, Cyprus. Zenonas, pleasure to have you.
Good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
My pleasure. So we've had some pretty significant news on the sanctions front this in the last week now. First, the European Union had their summit last week, where they discussed the possibility of new sanctions against Turkey. And then on Monday, the United States moved ahead with the CAATSA sanctions over the purchase of the S-400, sanctioning members of the Turkish defense industry. So the first question I want to ask you, Zenonas, is how does this affect the current state of affairs in the East Mediterranean in relation to Turkey, taken together?
Well, as you know, this talk about the sanctions is a recurring discussion, both with regard to the EU and the US. I mean, this is not the first time that the current presidency in the US is imposing sanctions on Turkey. We saw that previously with the case of Pastor Branson. But I think that this is changing things to some extent, but not perhaps to the extent that many people think. Because on the one hand, you have an EU that is evidently weak and unwilling to adopt a harsher stance against Turkey, mainly because of the many interests that are at stake. And the different dependencies that exist between Turkey and various EU member states of the EU, for example, Germany, Italy, Austria, and so on. So even France, to be honest, which is traditionally more, strict in terms of Turkey matters. So that's one thing, and the EU has demonstrated a degree of incredibility. So it's not really credible when it comes to following through with warnings against Turkey. I mean, if we go and back and see the results, the conclusions of not the previous, but the one before European Council, we will see that what the EU warned that they would do to Turkey, or the measures that they would impose, depending on Turkey's behavior, they did not follow through this time. They only imposed, they basically added a few names on that list with the measures. So nothing to see there. Business as usual. Hoping that they will be able to maintain a working relationship, a functioning relationship with Turkey. On the other hand, you have, across the Atlantic, you have a different approach to things, but also a delayed sort of response from the US on this, because the CAATSA discussion has been going on for a while. And it's only, they only imposed the sanctions when things couldn't go any further. Trump had to sort of respond to the Congress demands, and when the time came, he did not really impose serious sanctions. I mean, he could impose sanctions on the banking sector, on the economy, things that they would really damage the Turkish economy and cause a lot of political problems to Turkey as well. Instead, he focused mainly on the defense sector and on specific persons in that domain, obviously affecting the Turkish defense industry, and more so in the long run. But at the same time, I think that the US is also trying to leave some space to Turkey to save face and maybe come back to the negotiating table and renegotiate or discuss both the matter of S-400 missiles, but other matters as well. So we will have to observe how things will progress from now on, and see whether the Erdogan government, despite their proclamations about retaliating and so on, might fall back and try to discuss things with the US, and particularly with the new administration.
So in Turkey, ahead of the EU summit last week, There was some suggestion in a few of the Turkish media outlets that they were saying that they did not expect really serious action to come from that summit against Turkey, and it does seem somewhat validated since they announced that they were going to expand the list of individuals and entities that they would sanction, but without explicitly naming who they'd be adding to it. And going into the summit, of course, we had France, Greece, and Cyprus particularly pushing hard for sanctions. But in the absence of anything more than a commitment to expand this list, how is this decision really being received in, say, Athens or Nicosia about the approach to Turkey?
Well, I think Erdogan himself said that he did not fear EU sanctions, and as you rightly put it, they were right, and that's because of what I mentioned before. The degree to which the EU and various members need Turkey for different things. Right now in Nicosia and Athens. At the political level, this is promoted as some kind of a victory, not to they don't boast too much about it, but that's how they portray it. On the other hand, you have the social level, the public opinion that that does not like what's happening and what's going on, because they see the EU time and again taking this very light approach to Turkey, not being able to actually dictate the terms of the game and sort of manipulate, if you will, or affect Turkey's policies and stance. So there is a disappointment on that level in this regard. And I think this might, in the long run, have some sort of a political effect on the governments in the elections or whatever. But right now, I think most people understand that the EU is very limited in what it can do. Foreign policy has always been a major limitation of the EU, and I think this doesn't change. If you look at the conclusions of the latest summit, you will actually see that that they are calling for the US to be involved in this. So you can see how the EU is actually admitting that it is still dependent on the US to follow through on important matters of foreign policy.
That's something that's really interesting too, because in a report I read in the Greek media, they were saying that even President Macron of France, he was persuaded by Germany in particular to wait on this round until the Joe Biden administration really settles into office or in the next year. But I have to ask, because we saw, at least under Trump, there was, or at least through Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, there was a lot of interest in the East Mediterranean issue from him, and he seemed to be trying to move the U.S. closer to the Greek position on the matter. But now that we're going towards this point where the EU is handing the ball to the U.S. on the sanctions front, what does it mean to you for them to essentially take this approach, to rely on the U.S. to take the lead on the sanctions front related to Turkey?
Well, I think they just want the U.S. more involved. I mean, they understand that there is only so much they can do with regards to Turkey, and they understand that the U.S. is much more capable in applying pressure on Turkey and achieving political results. So I think they want to link sort of the problems of the two sides of the Atlantic in respect to Turkey, and they would also like. I think they also call for a different approach from the U.S. During the new administration in Washington. I think that's what they're calling for, and to take another perspective, we should also see the US policy in the region. And I think that it hasn't really changed over the past years, even from Obama. And I don't think that it will change much in the next years. And that approach is the approach of, retreating from the region to some extent, from having, let's say, more boots on the ground, but at the same time trying to create the necessary relationships and partnerships with local actors. And at this point in time, Cyprus, Greece, Israel, we see what's happening with Israel, their approachment with the Arab world, the Muslim world more generally. So this is their new approach that has been going on for a while, maybe almost 10 years. And I think this works in two ways. One way is that these actors will be able to serve or complement US interests in the region. And the other way that this works is that it sort of creates, let's say, a stick logic vis-a-vis Turkey. So that they're sending the message that, if Turkey does not sort of come back to the West or adopt a different approach in dealing with the West, then we have alternatives in the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean that we can use at the expense of Turkey. And I think the EU is understanding this approach, and because themselves cannot really do it the same way, they're calling for the US to help them in managing Turkey.
And do you think with Biden coming in, it could end up being more effective in that front? Considering, I imagine there was a lot of distrust considering Trump's close relationship with Erdogan, and Biden has a lot of experience with Turkey and in the East Mediterranean in general, from his time as a senator and then, of course, as vice president. But he's made it a point that he wants to strengthen U.S. alliances that he felt atrophied under the Trump administration. And at least Greece and Turkey are both part of NATO, and we can see the interest there. But of course, a lot of arguments in the U.S. sometimes go that they don't want to push Turkey too hard, or they might drift further towards Russia. It was floating around between Germany and France, and they don't want to push Turkey too far away. Do you think that's going to be a concern, that they might still be at risk of watering down any action, or do you think it just kind of creates the conditions for at least a more effective exchange of ideas on how to solve the situation and de-escalate tensions?
Sorry, I lost you for a while there. Could you maybe summarize the question?
No problem. Do you think that Biden's concern about rebuilding alliances, whether, say in this case NATO, and not pushing Turkey too far towards, say, Russia and China, do you think that might water down? Do you think that just sets more condition, a better stage to really negotiate these differences and de-escalate?
Sure, that's an interesting question. I think that the new administration would be, almost the same in essence with the previous one, meaning that they will still follow a logic of transactionalism. So they will maintain a transactional relationship with Turkey, but at the same time have this carrot and stick approach, doing their best to keep Turkey close to the US. The historic dilemma that the US is facing right now with regard to Turkey is that it realizes the problematic, the problems that Turkish foreign policy is causing for the US in the region and beyond. But at the same time, they also realize that if they adopt a harsher stance towards Turkey, they will indeed push it away towards Eurasianism, the Russia, China, and generally non-Western and even anti-Western actors, as we've seen Turkey developing such relationships. So we might be surprised and see Biden actually making more efforts in that respect. So trying to lure Turkey back to the US by providing some carrots, but at the same time continuing this policy of sticks that Trump, on some level and to some extent, started.
When the European, at the end of the European summit, when they released the new resolution, it in many ways looked exactly like the one that they produced in October, talking about the need to continue diplomacy, but also keeping room for sanctions. There was one change that stood out to me, and that was that they mentioned taking these issues beyond the Eastern Mediterranean, talking about assessing the relationship with Turkey in the entire region. And that seems to echo at least some of the French position about Turkish actions, whether it's in Syria or Nagorno-Karabakh or in Libya. But what I want to ask is, do you think, of course, there's a connection between all these topics, especially, say, Libya, Syria, the refugee situation, the East Mediterranean. But do you think that this is a realistic expectation of the EU to try to go this approach, or do you think this is something that's going to be also supported by the US or enabled by the US to actually succeed?
Yeah, I think you're right in that this statement sort of reflects the concerns of certain EU member states, particularly France and Greece and Cyprus. I think the EU can, observe and review and report on Turkish policy in the broader region, and it is a justified thing to do because I think there is a common now. There is a consensus and a common understanding that Turkish regional policy is not a defensive policy like officials in Ankara would like to say. It's more of a revisionist policy that extends far beyond Turkey's borders and sort of defines national security in terms of regional
doctrine,
stretch hegemony. So I think that the EU can, do that, but I don't think they can be effective in dealing with that. So the US comes in when we are talking about this, and they are more capable, as I said before, in dealing with this issue and this problem. But overall, I don't see how, at least at the time being, they will be able to limit or restrict Turkish actions in the area, because they are a bit too late. Both the reactions of the EU and the US seem to me, at least, to be too little, too late, because Turkey is already out of hand to a certain degree. And there is only so much you can do to negotiate with Turkey, but not actually impose anything on Turkey. It's very difficult to do that at this point in time. So we'll have to wait and see how things will pan out in terms of managing these different relationships.
One thing that Turkey seems to suggest, that they've suggested in the context of their relationship with the United States, at least, is that they would much rather prefer to, say, compartmentalize some of their issues, in many ways kind of like what they do with Russia. And it does seem that they will not want to really bunch in together the disputes with Greece and Cyprus on the one hand, and then of course their policies in Libya, which aggravates France, of course, and is obviously connected to that maritime deal they concluded last year with the GNA in Tripoli. And it just seems like this approach, and they wanted to connect all these issues. It just seems like it would just have no momentum, that Turkey would not be interested in really tying all of these together. Especially, if I remember correctly, last week at the summit, they introduced a human rights framework for sanctions on the EU level, and Turkey's doesn't seem like it would be very interested in hearing about that from the EU or anyone anytime soon.
Well, I think you're exactly right in that what Turkey is doing is try to develop these compartmentalized relations, not just with Russia, but with many other actors. I mean, look at Turkey, Iran. Look at Turkey, Greece, Turkey, Israel, and definitely Turkey, EU. And now they're trying to suggest that this should be the way forward for American-Turkish relations. And I'm not sure that Washington disagrees entirely, because they also understand that despite the good relationship that Turkey and Russia have, there are also, points of contention and friction between the two that they could maybe exploit, capitalize on, manipulate, and so on. So they would be willing, for at least some time and to some extent, sort of tolerate these compartmentalized relationships to try and find little windows of opportunities that would maybe help them bring Turkey back closer to them. This was, I think we've already seen this to some extent, and we will probably see it more. And this was definitely Turkey's sort of wish and approach even before the US election. I mean, you could see numerous articles and opinion editorials in the Turkish press calling for that and saying that, we work with Russia, but that doesn't mean we are pro-Russia. We have problems with Russia, but doesn't mean we're anti-Russia. So we can do the same with the US. So listen to us, hear us. We have problems as well. We need some common understanding, and we can make this work. So I think this is something that we should be waiting to see in this relationship.
Yeah, and there has been some hints that there's a receptiveness to that compartmentalization approach in some corners, at least Washington, including parts of the Biden camp. But it always just seemed, if we look at the relationship between Turkey and Russia, that they can separate their issues to a certain extent, but then they still feel that underlying competition. And say some of Turkey's issues with the West, whether it's rule of law and natural gas excavation with the EU, or the situation with the Kurds and Fethullah Gulen in the US, it seems like it works better on paper, the idea of compartmentalization, than ultimately in practice.
Well, with Russia, it's a bit more complicated. It's not exactly compartmentalization. It is to some extent, but it's also some sort of a linkage between issues, right? So they face problems in one domain, and they have cooperation in another domain, but they somehow manage to connect issues and negotiate and bring everything on the table, and reach some sort of consensus, find some sort of a middle ground that allows the relationship to remain functional and working. But this doesn't mean that they've solved their problems. It only means that for the time being, they are in a position to manage their problems, and they're doing this much better than any other international actor has done it with Turkey. I mean, if you see what Turkey, Russia are doing in Nagorno-Karabakh and Syria and Libya, this is a historic, thing to see. I think the question to think about in the future will be for how long will Turkey be able to maintain this relationship, all the while is having this problematic relationship with the West and the EU. It seems that at some point, Turkey will have to choose between the two. But it seems that this is not Ankara's opinion. And it seems that Ankara wants to make its best to maintain an independent role between, let's say, the two camps of the New World Order, let's say the West and Eurasia on the other hand, and wants to be somewhere in the middle, pulling the strings in every direction. So we will see how that will work.
In a previous podcast, I spoke to Mark Galeotti over at the Royal United Services Institute in London, And he suggested the reason why Turkey and Russia are able to communicate together so well is because in the way to look at international affairs, it's essentially they're speaking a very similar language, and it seems that that language is just becoming more distant and alien between, say, Turkey and the West, especially in the more recent years, since last 5 years or so, that the gap seems to be getting bigger in a number of ways. Do you think that that common sort of like understanding of between the two of them is completely gone, or do you think that there's a hope, at least in Turkey, that they can actually put this back together in some way? You already sort of answered that with how Turkey wants the best of both worlds, but how realistic is that, in your opinion?
Well, many people for a number of years now, I mean, maybe the past 10 years, have suggested that this is not feasible in the long run. But we've seen that that it has endured, right? Turkey is resilient in that respect. And I think that one reason this is true is because the international system is so different nowadays than 20 years ago, let's say. And there is space for states like Turkey, say middle powers looking to acquire a greater power status, to maneuver, geopolitically speaking, and be able to pursue their own agendas more freely without necessarily being subjected to the will of greater powers or traditional allies. So unless we see the US coming back strongly in international affairs as as the hegemon we once knew, and attaining a tight grip over its allies and different parts of the world, I think Turkey will still be able to maintain this, I call it this third pole role. So, you have West as one pole, Eurasia as another pole, and Turkey wants to become like a third individual pole in the middle. And I think it will be feasible for Turkey, at least in the near future. One thing that could hinder that is basically Turkey's own actions. So if Turkey, in fact, overextends and overstretches its power and operations, which it does not at this point, despite common belief, it is possible that it will create major costs to itself, and force it to fall back to probably the West, because Eurasia doesn't have as much to offer.
On that note, this week Erdogan spoke to Charles Michel, and he repeated something that he said not long ago, that he wants Turkey to build its future together with Europe. But of course, that's going to require some concessions. And what I want to ask you is, what do you think Erdogan and Turkey might be willing to offer to change the situation and rebuild that future with Europe?
Well, I think there's a lot of things they could offer, and a lot of things they could do, but it seems that they're unwilling to do them. For one, if Turkey was sincere about this, and wanted to appease concerns within the EU, they could simply, move on with domestic reforms in so many sectors, primarily human rights, democracy, and so on, and then mitigate their stance in various foreign policy issues. Cyprus is one of them. Greece is another. So from this perspective, I think that Turkey wants a relationship with the EU, definitely, but on its own terms, not the terms of the EU. And we do know that the EU is unable to offer Turkey, let's say, a full membership. Even if Turkey did everything right, it would be very difficult to see something like that happening, because there are certain states in the EU that don't want that, particularly states like France and Germany and Austria and so on. But they do want a special relationship because there is a lot to be gained from such a relationship on a trade level, on a investment level, on a security level, and so on. But I think it will take some time to reconfigure this relationship, because this is what Turkey is trying to do. Basically, put the Turkish-EU relationship on a different basis, a basis that will not be as demanding as previously, in the context of the Turkish accession process to the EU. And I think the EU would like that, because it will serve both their interests. No full membership, no breakup, but some sort of a working, beneficial, mutually beneficial relationship.
Dr. Zenonas Tziarras, this was a great conversation, and it was great to have you on. And I really do hope that you can join me again sometime soon here on Turkey Abroad.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure. I'll be with you anytime.
My name is Nicholas Morgan, and this is Turkey Abroad.